Bonjour à tous and welcome to another video. Today I'm responding to another request. This time I've been asked to talk about making comparisons in French, and I don't think I've ever made a video on this before, so thank you very much for the request. Now, comparisons in English are actually kind of complicated, right? Sometimes we add ER, sometimes we use more. French, on the other hand, is relatively simple. There are a few different things we need to talk about, but each one in itself is fairly simple. So let's start with plus and que, which basically means more than. And as I said, in English, sometimes we use er, sometimes we use more. In French, we always use plus. So for example, here we have Pierre, and here we have Jacques, because stereotypes. Clearly, Pierre is smaller than Jacques, right? And so in French, we would say Pierre est plus petit que Jacques. Pierre est plus petit que Jacques. It's as simple as that. Similarly, we could take a picture of France and Belgium, and we can clearly see that France is bigger than Belgium. La France est plus grande que la Belgique. So notice that we still need adjective agreement. We still need to say grande instead of grand because it's still an adjective. But to make it comparative, all we do is put plus and que on either side. We might have a car and a bike, une voiture and un vélo. If the car is more expensive than the bike, we would say la voiture est plus chère que le vélo. Again, making sure that cher agrees with la voiture. One thing that a lot of people are not sure about here is the pronunciation. Do I say plus or plus? Now, as a rule of thumb, we generally say that when it has a positive meaning, we say plus, and when it has a negative meaning, we say plus. But the problem with this is that with comparisons, sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative, right? More interesting is positive, but more dangerous is negative, and yet that is not going to affect the pronunciation of this word in this case. Because with comparisons, the S is silent before a consonant, regardless of the meaning of the word. So more expensive is plus cher, and taller is plus grand, and shorter is plus petit, right? Regardless of whether you think they're positive or negative, we always say plus in those cases. However, when it comes before a vowel or a silent H, the S is liaised, so we're not going to pronounce it plus, but instead plus. So for example, happier is plus heureux. More interesting is plus intéressant. So in actual fact, the S sounds more like a Z than an S. Basically, with comparisons like this, you're never going to say plus. Then, of course, we have the opposite of plus, which is moins, meaning less. So, for example, here we have un oiseau, and here we have un ours. We could say l'oiseau est moins dangereux que l'ours. The bird is less dangerous than the bear, although, to be fair, I would not want to meet that bird in a dark alley. Here we have la bière, and here we have le vin. We'll just imagine that there's wine in that glass. We could say la bière est moins forte que le vin, meaning beer is less strong than wine. So the principle with plus and moins is exactly the same. We have plus, adjective que, or moins, adjective que, remembering that we still need to agree the adjective. We then move on to a couple of exceptions. Consider, for example, in English, the adjective good. We do not say gooder and we do not say more good. Instead, we say better, right? And it's the same in French. We don't say plus bon. Instead, we say meilleur. So, for example, again, we have la bière and le vin. We could say that la bière est meilleure que le vin. And you can fight me about that one. The same goes for the adverb bien, which does not become plus bien, but instead mieux. So for example, here we have Sophie, elle danse bien. And here we have Jacques, il ne danse pas bien. Therefore, Sophie danse mieux que Jacques. We then have the slightly strange case of pire versus plus mauvais. So in English, again, bad does not become badder or more bad, instead it becomes worse, right? And in French, usually the word for worse is pire, and I would suggest that you just learn that and move on. However, you might also see plus mauvais, which is much less common but does exist. Now, I've done some research on this because I've never really learnt a rule for this. And what I found is that if something is inherently bad, the example I've seen being pollution, you cannot use plus mauvais. On the other hand, if we take something more subjective like the weather, we might describe it as plus mauvais. So you could say, il fait plus mauvais aujourd'hui qu'hier. The weather is worse today than it was yesterday. However, like I said before, in most cases, you can quite comfortably use pire, so be aware that plus mauvais does exist, but it's absolutely no problem if you use pire all the time. I then want to move on to comparisons of quantity, which are a little bit different to what we've seen, although not too complicated. When we want to say more of something than something else, we will use plus de blah 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 que. Notice this time that I am pronouncing the S as an S. So for example, here we have Pierre and his friend. We might say that Pierre a un ami. Here we have Julie and her friends. Julie a 4 amis. Therefore, Julie has more friends than Pierre, right? Julie a plus d'amis que Pierre. Julie a plus d'amis que Pierre. Similarly, here we have a family. We will call them les Martins. Ils ont 2 enfants. They have 2 children, right? Here we have Amélie. She has 1 child. Amélie a un enfant. Therefore, les Martins ont plus d'enfants qu'Amélie. They have more children than Amélie. Of course, the same goes in the reverse. We can use moins de blah 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 que. So again, here we have Pierre and his friend and Julie? Sophie? I honestly can't keep track of all these names. For now, let's call her Sophie. Pierre a moins d'amis que Sophie. And then once again, if we have les Martins and Amélie, we can say that Amélie a moins d'enfants que les Martins. So essentially, with quantities, numbers of things, the principle is basically the same, except now we need to remember that with plus, we pronounce the S, and in both cases, we need a de. Finally, I want to talk about comparing things which are the same. So in English, we might say something like, he is as tall as her, or the car is as expensive as the bike, right? In this case, in French, we're going to use aussi, adjective que. So for example, here we have Jacques again, and here we have Pierre, who has grown up. So we can say that Pierre is as tall as Jacques. Pierre est aussi grand que Jacques. Of course, we could use this in the negative to say that one thing is not as adjective as another thing. So for example, we have la Belgique and la France again. We could say that la Belgique n'est pas aussi grande que la France. Belgium is not as big as France. And once again, when we start talking about quantities, then we need to change things a little bit. So if you want to say as many as, or as much as, because French doesn't distinguish between much and many, we use autant de blah 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 que. So for example, once again, here we have les Martins, and here we have les Dupont, because again, I can't think of anything other than stereotypical names today. Now, apart from the fact that they look surprisingly similar, the Martin and the Dupont have the same number of children, right? So, les Martins have as many children as les Dupont. So, les Martins ont autant d'enfants que les Dupont. And there we have it. That's pretty much it on comparisons. I've put a few sentences in the description that you might want to try to translate for a little bit of practice. Of course, you can also try your own as well. Hopefully this has been clear. Of course, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, à bientôt.